When Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso came together to form the Alliance of the Sahel, most people laughed. They said it was doomed from the start. A bloc of military juntas? It would collapse before it even began. But 1 year later, those same voices have gone quiet. Not only has the AES survived, it has grown stronger, more coordinated, more ambitious. What was once dismissed as a fragile alliance has now captured the attention of the entire region. And now, something unexpected has happened. Chad. In a recent interview with Sputnik Africa, a top advisor to the Chadian President revealed that Chad is seriously considering joining the AES. This isn't just speculation, it's a sign that the balance of power in West Africa is shifting. The question is why? Why are countries once loyal to ECOWAS now turning their heads toward the Sahel Alliance? What is the AES offering that ECOWAS no longer can? And more importantly, is this the beginning of the end for ECOWAS, a bloc that has stood for over 5 decades? This is no longer about military rule. This is about sovereignty, self-reliance, and a new vision for Africa, a vision that's spreading, one country at a time. In that same interview with Sputnik Africa, Chad's presidential advisor, Ali Abdelrahmane Hager, didn't mince his words. He said what many across the Sahel already feel. The people of Chad, Niger, Burkina Faso, and Mali, we are not strangers to one another, he declared. We share more than borders. We share history, culture, struggle, and now a common destiny. For years, these nations have lived under the shadow of foreign control, economically, militarily, politically. But now, something is shifting. The AES, according to Hager, isn't just a political bloc. It's a symbol, a wave of sovereignty, rising from the red dust of the Sahel and gaining speed. And Chad? Chad wants in. According to Hager, the AES offers more than ideology. It offers real, tangible opportunities, investment in infrastructure, joint energy projects, and the birth of new regional economic zones that could finally bring prosperity to a region long ignored. But Hager wasn't alone. Just days earlier, on May 13th, Chad's Minister of Communication, Gassim Sharif, publicly echoed those same sentiments. A government once hesitant, now leaning forward. The silence in N'Djamena is breaking, and a new political consensus is forming. More and more, Chad's leaders are no longer asking if they should join the AES. They're asking when. But before we can answer that, we must ask a deeper question. What does Chad truly share with the AES countries? And what does this growing alliance mean for the future of West Africa? The answers lie not in politics alone, but in the bloodlines, the battles, and the buried histories that unite the Sahel. Stay with us. But Chad's connection to the AES goes far beyond geography. Yes, it's part of the Sahel, but there's something else, something much deeper and far more political. President Mahamat Idris Deby. It's easy to forget how he came to power. Not through elections, through a coup, just like in Mali, just like in Niger, just like in Burkina Faso. But here's the twist. Chad's coup wasn't condemned by the West. It was embraced. Because this one, it was backed by France. For over a century, Chad has been one of Paris's most loyal outposts in Africa, not just diplomatically, but militarily. France didn't just influence policy in Chad, it practically wrote it. In the 1960s and 70s, when the Chadian government was locked in brutal conflict with Frolinat rebels, guess who showed up? French troops. In 1982, when Hissène Habré seized power, guess who supported the transition? France. And in 1990, when Idriss Déby overthrew Habré in his own coup, France stayed silent. Because for Paris, it wasn't about democracy. It was about control. A stable, loyal Chad meant a stronger French grip over the Sahel. So long as Chad kept playing by France's rules, its coups were never a problem. But now, the ground is shifting. The younger Déby might have inherited his father's seat, but he's looking at the map with fresh eyes. He sees the AES rising. He sees sovereignty, unity, and something France can't offer, independence. So the question becomes, is Chad still France's final domino in the Sahel? Or is it the next nation to fall into the hands of a growing African revolution? The lines are being redrawn, and Chad is standing at a crossroads. France didn't just stand by during Idriss Déby's rise to power. They bankrolled it, financial support, military logistics, political cover, everything he needed to cement his grip on Chad. They provided it. And in return, Déby delivered exactly what France wanted: stability and loyalty. He held elections, yes, but only when necessary. And even then, they were more of a performance than a real democratic exercise. France got access, influence, strategic military bases. Déby got 38 years of unchallenged power. But then, 2021, the battlefield claimed Idriss Déby's life. And with his death came a moment of rare uncertainty in N'Djamena. The seat of power was empty. And France? France couldn't risk letting the people choose a successor. There was too much at stake: military partnerships, energy interests, influence across the Sahel. So once again, Paris stepped in. With the quiet approval of President Emmanuel Macron, with the coordination of elite Chadian politicians, and with the backing of a powerful military machine, a new coup was born. Idriss Déby's son, Mahamat, was installed as leader. Not elected, not chosen by the people, handpicked by the old power structure. French interests and Sahelian elites working in tandem. And once again, the illusion of stability was preserved. But beneath the surface, something had changed. A younger Déby now sits on the throne. He inherited his father's allies, his father's enemies, and his father's debt to Paris. But will he honor it, or will he break free? Because the winds of change are sweeping across the Sahel, and Chad is now caught between two worlds: the comfort of old alliances and the call of a new revolution. And the AES? They're watching, waiting, ready to welcome their next brother into the fold. But perhaps the most shocking twist in this story was Emmanuel Macron himself. When Mahamat Idriss Déby took power through a military coup, Macron didn't just stay silent. He endorsed it publicly. He called the coup necessary, claiming it was vital for regional stability and security. No outrage, no sanctions, no lectures about democracy. This is the same Macron who rushed to condemn the military takeovers in Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso, labeling their leaders as threats to regional order, cutting aid, and pulling diplomatic ties. So what changed? Nothing. Because this wasn't about democracy. It never was. It was about interests, French interests. If the generals in Mali or Niger had waved the French flag and bowed to Paris, they'd be having champagne in the Élysée right now. If Traoré had declared loyalty to France, his government would be on every Western news outlet, painted as stabilizing heroes. But they didn't. They chose sovereignty. And for that, France turned on them. Now, let's go back to Chad. At first, Mahamat Déby played the familiar game. He kept the French close, hosting their troops, shaking Macron's hand, and presenting himself as the last line of defense for France in the Sahel. And for a while, it worked. Chad became France's final stronghold, their last military ally in a region that was turning its back. But the winds began to shift. Across N'Djamena and beyond, anti-French sentiment started bubbling. Citizens took to the streets. Political elites started whispering about betrayal, about sovereignty, about the need for change. And Mahamat Déby? He saw the writing on the wall. Quietly, cautiously, he began reaching out, not to Paris, but to Moscow, to Beijing, Russia, China. New partners, new possibilities. And in doing so, he crossed an invisible line, one that France had drawn long ago: obey or be replaced. For decades, France dictated what Sahelian countries could and could not do, who they could trade with, who they could arm, who they could trust. But now, Chad was breaking the script. And France? France was watching nervously. Because if Chad turns, if they join the AES, it's game over for France in the Sahel. France thought it still had one loyal friend left. After Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso slammed the door shut, cutting military ties, expelling diplomats, and denouncing French influence, Chad remained silent, cooperative, strategically vital. Paris clung to it because Chad was the last card on the table. But what came next? France never saw coming. After Mahamat Déby's government transitioned into civilian rule and held elections, something shifted. Whether it was the people, the political elite, or the rising tide of Pan-African consciousness, Chad was no longer the country France once controlled. The revolution that began in Mali, then spread to Niger and Burkina Faso, had finally reached N'Djamena, and in November 2024, Chad made its move. In a single stunning announcement, the Chadian government declared the military agreement with France null and void. French troops? They were given their marching orders. Just like that, over 140 years of military partnership, gone. Torn apart by one act of defiance, one declaration of sovereignty. For France, it was a diplomatic disaster, not only because it marked the end of their last Sahelian alliance, but because that base in Chad was their final foothold in the region. It wasn't just a retreat, it was humiliation, and Chad made it clear, this wasn't about switching from one master to another. In a bold public statement, Chad's foreign minister, Abderrahmane Koulibaly, didn't hold back. He called the military agreement with France obsolete. He said it no longer reflected the political and geostrategic realities of our time. And then, he said something that echoed across the continent. Chad will not follow a logic of substitution of one power for another, nor an approach of changing masters. These weren't just words. They were a warning shot, a signal that a new era had begun, not just for Chad, but for all of Africa. And as France scrambled to understand what went wrong, a new alliance was rising, stronger, bolder, and more unified than ever before. The AES wasn't just an idea anymore. It had become a force. And Chad was now knocking on its door. Chad's decision to expel French troops didn't just sting, it humiliated France. For President Macron, it was a bitter blow. One French elite even accused him of opening the eyes of Africans. And by February 2025, the damage was complete. France's military withdrawal from Niger marked the end of its presence in the Sahel. Macron, clearly rattled, made a public statement that stunned many. "I'm still waiting for a thank you from the Sahel states." He claimed France had saved them from collapse back in 2013 and insisted they were ungrateful. But these weren't the words of a confident leader. They were the bitter ramblings of a man watching a century of dominance unravel. Africa hasn't forgotten. It's remembered everything. And this time, it chose not to say thanks. It chose to say goodbye. By now, one thing is clear. Chad and the AES are no longer strangers. In fact, since February 2025, Chad has taken bold steps to solidify its place alongside Niger, Mali, and Burkina Faso. That same month, the Chadian president made a highly symbolic visit to Burkina Faso. And this wasn't just a diplomatic formality. He was welcomed personally by Captain Ibrahim Traoré, not with a handshake, but with a gesture rich in meaning. Traoré gifted him a chapeau saponé, a traditional hat from Burkina Faso, recognized globally as a cultural heritage symbol. It was more than a gift. It was a message of brotherhood, of unity, of shared destiny. The Chadian leader was also invited as guest of honor at the opening of the 29th Pan-African Film and Television Festival of Ouagadougou, FESPACO, a stage once dominated by Western soft power, now echoing with African pride. Chad isn't just visiting the AES bloc, it's becoming a part of it. During their meeting, both presidents spoke candidly about sovereignty, fighting neo-colonialism, security, and building self-reliance in key sectors. They praised the deep historic ties between their nations and agreed to fast-track a joint cooperation commission. The Chadian president asked Traoré to visit Chad. With that, a new era began. Chad and Burkina Faso are no longer just allies. They're partners in a shared African future. So it's no surprise that Chad's political elites are now seriously considering joining the AES. Frankly, it's the most logical move. Like Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso, Chad is battling relentless insecurity, especially from Boko Haram, the same insurgent group that's plagued the region for over a decade. And despite years of hosting French troops, the violence never stopped. But now that France is gone, Chad finally has options. And one of the strongest? The AES. By joining the alliance, Chad could regain control over its own security, working hand in hand with neighbors who face the same threats. Security expert Yusuf Adam Abdallah said it best. Joining the AES would be one of the best alternatives to solve Chad's eternal security crisis. And with the joint military force created by Niger, Mali, and Burkina Faso in 2024 already active, Chad wouldn't be fighting alone anymore. But security isn't the only reason Chad is eyeing the AES. There's also development, trade, a chance to build, not just defend. And Chad isn't alone. In January 2025, another ECOWAS member stepped forward, Togo. In a bold interview, Togolese Foreign Minister Robert Dussey said what many have been thinking: it's not impossible. The idea of Togo joining the AES is real. He made it clear, Togo wants dialogue, but not dependency. He spoke of a continent used as a tool, forced to serve great powers instead of itself. We say no. Ask the Togolese people if they want to join the AES. I think they'd say yes. The message from across Africa is growing louder. We want sovereignty. We want unity. We want to choose our future together. It's not official yet, but the mere fact that political leaders in Chad and Togo are openly considering the AES says something loud and clear. The AES has what ECOWAS has lost. Think about it. If ECOWAS was truly living up to its promise, why would its own members be looking for the exit? As President Ibrahim Traoré said when Burkina Faso left, ECOWAS has strayed from the ideals of its founding fathers and from Pan-Africanism. And he wasn't wrong. Yes, ECOWAS boasts about regional integration, but in just 2 years, the AES has done more unity, more coordination, more sovereignty than ECOWAS has achieved in decades. And then there's the so-called democracy. Under ECOWAS, democracy has become little more than ritual elections, while strong men manipulate constitutions to rule indefinitely. In Cameroon, Ivory Coast, and most recently Togo, leaders have rewritten laws to stay in power. Togo's president, whose family has ruled for over 40 years, just changed the constitution again so he can rule for life. And ECOWAS? Not a word. No sanctions, no statements, no principles. So maybe the real question isn't why countries are leaving ECOWAS. Maybe it's why they stayed this long. Most elections under ECOWAS are little more than shams, stage managed by leaders desperate to cling to power. Take Nigeria, for example. The current ECOWAS chairman, President Bola Tinubu, came to power under a cloud of electoral controversy. Yet he had the audacity to criticize the military governments in Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso, regimes that, unlike his, enjoy widespread public support. So the question is simple: how can ECOWAS preach democracy when its own house is broken? And what about its claims of regional unity? Sure, ECOWAS boasts about the free movement of people and goods. But after 50 years, what has it really united? Borders remain tight. Tensions between member states persist. And when the Sahel was burning, when Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso were facing terrorism, chaos, and foreign interference, ECOWAS did nothing. No coordinated aid, no joint military action, no support, just silence and condemnation. So when ECOWAS talks about unity, ask yourself, unity for who and at what cost? Let's be honest, the Sahel today is known for poverty, underdevelopment, and above all, insecurity. Jihadist groups and armed rebels have turned it into a war zone. Millions dead, millions more displaced, and the violence, it keeps spreading. So where has ECOWAS been? Nowhere. Since the crisis began in 2013, ECOWAS, this so-called regional power, has never mobilized its collective resources to help. No joint security force, no funding, no serious intervention, just silence. Maybe, just maybe, if ECOWAS had acted, the crisis wouldn't have grown this out of control. So when Ibrahim Traoré said one of the reasons Burkina Faso left ECOWAS was its failure to help fight insecurity, he wasn't exaggerating, he was just telling the truth. Now contrast that with the AES. Since its formation, Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso haven't just talked, they've acted. Together, they've launched joint military operations that have scored real victories on the ground. They've created a 5,000-man joint force, drawing soldiers from all 3 nations. And that force is actively fighting terrorism right now in the heart of the Sahel. Now here's the question. Did you know ECOWAS has its own military arm, ECOMOG? More than that, ECOWAS has the power to mobilize troops from 15 different countries. We saw it in action not long ago, when the bloc scrambled to pressure Niger's military to reinstate President Bazoum. So if ECOWAS could gather a force for that, why hasn't it done the same to fight terrorism? Why hasn't it lifted a finger to help the Sahel battle the threat that's claimed millions of lives? The answer is clear. Because ECOWAS was never about protecting Africa's people, it was about protecting its puppets. And with everything we've seen, the choice becomes obvious. Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso had no choice but to walk away. They didn't abandon unity, they redefined it. As Chad's presidential advisor put it, the AES isn't just a bloc, it's a movement, a new wave of sovereignty, a new model for regional development, an African solution to an African problem. While ECOWAS clings to broken promises and foreign influence, the AES is rising, grounded in action, unity, and purpose. Let's be real, ECOWAS is in shambles, and the AES, it's the future. With bold military leaders at the helm, the next few years will define a new era, not just for West Africa, but for the entire continent. The revolution is already happening. What do you think? Let us know in the comments below. And if you believe in African sovereignty, hit that like button, drop a comment, and subscribe to the channel. Africa is watching, the world is listening, and the AES is just getting started.